Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex, and today I want to show you guys the 5 teams that I use to complete each world boss at a high level so that you can understand the synergies that I'm using, so that you can maybe prioritize new characters, you can get better clears on your 5 world bosses of the day if it lands on one of the 5 best bosses, which would be Proxima, Cull Obsidian, Corvus, Ebony, or Thanos. And you can also see some of the support characters that I use in some of the strikers. Now, in general, I like to find a baseline difficulty for World Boss Ultimate that not only pushes my raid level, but has an opportunity to give me some pretty good loot. So I try to go to at least 40 or 50 for each of these world bosses every single day, except for Thanos, which I usually top out at about 20 or 25. I haven't really pushed him too much lately. But keep in mind that all of these clears that I am able to complete, of course, they use my own roster, they use my cards, which may be out of reach for you. I also have raid level 351, which really lowers the boss's defenses, or it lowers the damage reduction that I take, and it increases the damage that I do. And then I have quite a bit of valor from having all 39 universal types at tier 2, so I have over 1700. So keep that in mind. If you can't quite get there yet, that's probably what's holding you back. So for Proxima, I usually aim to clear about stage 40. I can go up to 55 specifically with Deadpool, but if I'm not doing that clear with Deadpool, I like to bring him down to 40 and just completely crush Proxima. If I'm not pushing Deadpool to a very high stage, I like to use a team up that doesn't consist of any premium support characters, because I can save them for other clears and make those easier. So what I usually do, and what you'll see me do on stream sometimes, is use Thanos and Punisher. I use them because they each give him an all attack recovery or physical attack recovery team up. They both have basically an identical team up, so you get an extra 10% all attack and 10% recovery rate, which is fantastic for Deadpool. And of course, the self lead is beautiful. As far as the strikers, this is what I go for. Scarlet Witch and Invisible Woman are pretty much on every single team that I use for every single world boss because of the mind control. And then Sharon and Luna just do bonkers damage, and Luna has a chance to mind control with the 4th skill. And then specifically for Proxima, I bring another physical damage leadership type striker because of the increased damage to supervillains is really good for Deadpool. And then 50% chance when attacking is also the best one. For Deadpool specifically, you can use 50% chance when attacked, because he takes so much damage, and it doesn't matter because he always self-heals. The second team that I like to use consists of Quicksilver as the main DPS. I always try to establish one main DPS first. For the leadership, I like to use Beast because it's 50% physical attack. It is the self buff on his 5th skill, Stars and Garters, that he can pass to Quicksilver at the beginning. And then if I need to switch later on when I'm kiting, I can pass it again. And then he also has the flat recovery rate, crit rate, guaranteed crit rate bonus that does give Quicksilver a small bump. As far as the support character goes, I usually just go with either Shuri or Valkyrie. It doesn't matter too much for Quicksilver, but either one is good. If I'm feeling a little bit less skillful, I usually pick Shuri because she has a better chance of being able to finish off Proxima if Quicksilver dies with 1 bar left, whereas Valkyrie is pretty much useless if Quicksilver dies, and then I have to restart the stage. The third clear that I like to use is Captain America as the main DPS, although he doesn't have a leadership, so I do need to bring someone along. I bring usually Bucky, although I sometimes use just a generic 45 or 50% like an anti-man, but Bucky does have a lot more power if Captain America dies, and he has the Fellowship team up. I also like to take advantage of another team up specifically for Cap against Proxima, and that is Coulson for an extra 5% HP and all defense, because he does get hit by Proxima, he does take damage. The strikers for Captain America are slightly different. It's basically the same 4 or the same 3, but I usually sub out Luna Snow because she does mostly energy damage for Deadpool, which is a much better striker. And then I also sub out Mr. Fantastic for Anti-Venom because I need that healing, and he drops those blobs very frequently to get those heals off. The 4th team that I like to use is actually War Machine, and I particularly like War Machine for 2 reasons. Well, 3 reasons. 1, he's a badass and he does a ton of physical damage. 2, he has a self-buffing leadership, so he's able to use and take advantage of 2 supports instead of just 1. And 3, he's got the leadership tag, so that means I can not only apply Valkyrie's passive, I can also apply White Fox's passive, which is fantastic. So he gets that 60% leadership bonus against villains, then he gets an additional, I believe, 45% or, yeah, So yeah, he's rocking like over 100% increased damage. So he really melts with this team up. After that, where did she go? Let's just pretend this is Valkyrie for a second. After that, I use an identical team up to Captain America because I'd still need the heals that Anti-Venom provides, and the rest of the team is just fantastic as it is. I wouldn't swap out Sharon Rogers for Mr. Fantastic. The last team that I like to use is actually a bit contested. It's not a guarantee here for the 5th one. Proxima is probably one of the more difficult days I have, clearing 5 out of 5, level 40 and up. But I usually tend to gravitate towards Scarlet Witch. It's not the most clean clear. It does take quite a lot of time, like 3 to 4 minutes, but she can absolutely do it. And because I recently got Nick Fury, he can also help out both as a support and as a leadership, because her 45% is actually a little bit worse than his 50, which is nice. And then he also applies the White Fox bonus. He also gives her super armor so she doesn't get guard broken and stuff like that. And then because I have all of the support characters, I can actually throw a second one here to make her extra tanky and extra powerful. But I've been experimenting recently with basically swapping out Scarlet Witch for Mr. Fantastic, and then swapping out Ghost Panther for Thing to get that additional 40% all attack. Now, you are doubling down on the super armor, so it's not technically the best. So I do think it may be better to switch him for Ghost Panther, but otherwise, sometimes I actually end up finishing World Boss Ultimate without using all of my supports because I'm still missing Ebony from those 5 rotations. But I usually like to take advantage of his leadership, and I can't against Proxima because energy damage doesn't do as much as physical. So Proxima is one of the more difficult days, but that is what I do. For Cull Obsidian, it's a little bit easier. I do also roll my way down to 40. My main DPS and the easiest clear by far is Sharon Rogers. If I'm pushing up to 49, I definitely use She-Hulk and White Fox, and I can also use Nick Fury and White Fox, which is absolutely insane, and it's 120% increase to supervillains, which is bonkers. The same strikers apply here. She definitely needs the heal. Sometimes I'll swap out Deadpool for someone like Psylocke for the additional energy damage. After I use Sharon Rogers, I usually move on to Luna Snow. She's my second easiest clear. I usually like to use Luna Snow with Shuri or possibly sometimes White Fox, and then the Misty Knight leadership. You can also sub in Nick Fury because she does get guard broken and he gives her super armor, which reduces the guard break. But for Luna Snow, you don't have to use, or I don't have to use Anti-Venom because I don't need the heals. So I usually end up going with this lineup, or sometimes I put in Doctor Doom instead of Psylocke. The third clear that I like to use is, of course, Scarlet Witch. She's a very powerful character to use against Cull Obsidian because you can get those mind controls off a lot. At this point, once I've used, White Fox, once I've used Nick Fury, I have to start dipping into my other supports. So I usually give her Shuri and Ghost Panther, or I use Ebony Maw and Valkyrie. Usually I like to give her 2. As an aside, you can also use lesser strikers like 30% crit damage from Ulysses Claw, or the 10 to 15% energy attack from Cyclops, or you could also use the 20% energy attack from Ghost if you have the uniform and tier 2. So those are ones you can sub in if you've already used all of your supports, your kind of increased damage against supervillain support type characters, or if you just don't have enough and you need an extra bump. The last 2 clears for Cull Obsidian are a little bit more difficult, but I like to use Gambit, and I want to do another dedicated video on Gambit to illustrate something new that I've been doing and having a ton of success with. But in the meantime, what I usually do with Gambit is I give him Ebony Maw's leadership for the energy damage and the additional increased damage to villains. And then I usually top that off with Bullseye. And I know what you're going to say, why am I using Bullseye? Well, he gives an all-attack max HP bonus, and he has another kind of surprise gift that Gambit will always do his 5th skill on the team up. So we'll talk more about that later. I don't want to give too much away. For this team up, though, you absolutely need to sub out Cyclops or Psylocke for Anti-Venom because he needs the heals if he happens to get hit. You shouldn't get hit playing as Gambit, but if he gets hit, you need to use it. The last team that I would use after using up all of those other teams would be Cable. This again is not the cleanest clear, but it's the one that I end up gravitating towards and using. Now, depending on which leadership I've used, sometimes I use Magneto just as an extra bit of damage in case Cable dies, but also an increase of 45% attack if I don't have She-Hulk, which I like to use. And then I just throw in usually Ghost Panther or Valkyrie or Coulson, whoever I have left, because the synergy is there for the crit rate that he gives himself, up to 70% basically, or 75%, and the guaranteed crit that Coulson provides. Cable, you can drop the extra heal, but I usually like to risk it and just go pure damage because he heals himself with his third skill. Moving on to Corvus. Corvus is the easiest world boss, I think, so I actually try to always clear at least stage 50. I can go all the way up to stage 67 right now currently with Deadpool, but if I'm not pushing that stage with Deadpool, it's the same team up that I use for Proxima. It's Deadpool plus Thanos and Punisher. Alternatively, sometimes I will give him an ignore dodge support character here like Ronin or Wiccan because they provide 20%. But otherwise, what I do is, most of the time, normally what I do is this team up, and then this is where it gets different. I actually sub out all of the other strikers, and I provide 3 ignore dodge strikers depending on their strength. I usually actually use Misty Knight, Nadia, and Kate Bishop, and this will give me, because he has 40% from his CTP of energy, this will cap me at 100%, and that's usually the 5 strikers that I use for every single character, unless they have an ignore dodge leadership, as you'll see, or they have some sort of passive. The second team I use for Corvus, which is also very, very easy to use, is the same setup here of Beast with a support, and the main damage being Quicksilver. Now, Quicksilver natively has 50% ignore dodge. I swapped out his CTP of energy, so he only has 50%. So in this case, I would need to bring along 3 more, but I actually only bring 2, because with 90% he still manages to do a boatload of damage, and then I can also bring along Deadpool for added damage. The other thing about Quicksilver is sometimes you're early on his, or you're late on his proc, because it's very hard to cancel 3, 5, 4. So actually having 90% ignore dodge instead of 100 means that you miss a little more often, which actually helps your proc land more consistently on that 4th skill. So if that's something that you've had trouble with, I've had success with that. Try that out. The third team I like to use is Luna Snow. She's a very easy clear for Corvus Glaive, and then I like to use Misty Knight, and I like to use specifically for this one Coulson, because he adds an additional #1 fan energy attack speed, and then he's got the guaranteed crit with the extra bonus. And then we have to use 3 strikers, so I do sub out. Actually, sometimes I keep Deadpool in and I sub out Scarlet Witch for an ignore dodge striker, but other times I keep the 2 because she has, Luna Snow does mind control, but sometimes I keep the 2 and I do sub out Deadpool for my last ignore dodge. Where is she? I don't know where she is. Anyways, my last ignore dodge striker. The 4th team I like to use is very similar, except instead of Luna Snow, it's of course Sharon Rogers. Sharon Rogers, I like to give her usually the Ebony Maw team up with one other, like for example Ghost Panther, and then like the others, because she has a CTP of energy, she can use, or she needs to use 3 strikers. However, in this case, I usually have to sub out either Invisible Woman or Scarlet Witch because I do need that heal. So sometimes I try to go for a different team up that gives her 20% ignore or 25% ignore dodge from someone like Ancient One, and then this way with the 25% ignore dodge from the tier 2 passive, I can sub out one of the strikers and still keep 2 of my mind control strikers to get off as much as they can. The last team that I use for Corvus, you're probably expecting it by now, is Gambit. I use his own leadership because the 50% dodge coupled with the CTP of energy means that he basically only needs 1 ignore dodge striker. For the additional support, I like to use Shuri most of the time, but I can now use Nick Fury, which is much, much better. And then for the last one, I do again like to use, and you can try it yourself, him. Bullseye. And then because I only need 1 striker, I can always sub in Deadpool and still have the heal from Anti-Venom. So this is a very potent combination. All the mind controls, all the Deadpool, all defense downs, and the heals dropping like crazy. Moving on to the second last one, we have Ebony Maw. For Ebony Maw, I do also like to push up to stage 50, and I think it's possible, and most of the time I can do it on computer. It's a little bit harder on my phone to get 5 out of 5 clears on stage 50, so sometimes I have to drop down to stage 45. But at stage 50, I can get most of these clears the first time, and most of these characters can push beyond stage 50. I'm up to stage 58 right now, or 59 rather, with Scarlet Witch, so she is definitely my #1 clear for this day. At level 50, she doesn't need any supports whatsoever, but I usually just slap one on because I have so many, and then I give her, you know, Vision for the team up, or Wiccan for her father or daughter, mother, son team up, or, you know, even Quicksilver can do it. Doesn't really matter. Literally anyone can go here. She can solo the stage. It's pretty absurd. The strikers specifically for this day are just maximum damage, so I usually bring along these three. I usually bring her along as well, and then I usually go for mind damage with Psylocke. You can also try Emma Frost. There's quite a few elemental damage characters that you can use, but Ebony Maw is also a pretty difficult day to clear 5. The second one that I like to use, of course, against Ebony Maw, especially at tier 3, is Luna Snow. She's amazing, especially with Misty Knight. And then I usually also give Coulson for that additional #1 fan team up and the guaranteed crit. Again, it's pretty much identical strikers. You're just swapping out one character for another. She also doesn't need the heals. The third one that I've been doing a lot of lately is Ghost Panther lead with Human Torch and an additional third support because I have so many now. Really digging this team. And he can do it. It's difficult. He usually finishes with about 30 seconds to 5 seconds left, but with this team up, he again doesn't need the heal. I usually actually end up swapping Deadpool or Psylocke for Luna Snow, and he can complete it if you get enough mind controls off and if you're lucky. From there, after those 3, I usually go over to Sharon Rogers. Sharon Rogers can have some difficulty if you don't get enough mind control, so I like to give her a lot of help with both She-Hulk and White Fox. I try to stack as much on Sharon Rogers as possible because she doesn't deal elemental damage, but she deals a shit ton of damage with her tier 3 ability. Same thing with the strikers. It's basically this list, but then we move out Psylocke for Anti-Venom to get those juicy heals because Sharon absolutely needs it. Mr. Free-to-Play wasn't lying to you. You definitely need those heals for tier 3 Sharon Rogers. And then the 5th clear is really where I'm having some trouble. Lately, I've been clearing it with Thor, and if I haven't used both White Fox and Nick Fury, I will drop one of those in because he has the leadership tag, so he can use White Fox. But if I've already used them, then it kind of gets a little bit dicey. Gambit can do it, but he does need quite a bit of support, so I usually throw in Shuri. I usually throw in a nice leadership that's going to bump up his damage a lot, like Star-Lord or Anti-Man or something like that, or I can use Nick Fury's leadership. Besides Gambit, I also sometimes have used lately Psylocke, although she does die very quickly, but it's basically the same team up. You're just trying to give her as much damage as possible in the first slot and then give her as much support in the next slot because neither of these characters have good leaderships. I also sometimes use Emma Frost. Emma Frost is another one that can kind of go either way, but it's a very close clear. It's usually done in about 4 to 4.5 minutes, so it takes a lot of concentration, and then the strikers are basically always the same. You got Invisible Woman, Scarlet Witch, Deadpool, Luna Snow, and tier 3 Sharon Rogers and or Psylocke. The final one is Thanos. Thanos is probably my worst day by far. The max I can do is stage 29 with some of my more powerful tier 3s like Sharon Rogers, but I usually dial it down to 25 or even down to 20. As long as you're above or at or above 20, you will be able to get the CTPs from the booty box if you get lucky, or the premium cards, so that is what you want to aim for at minimum. For these ones, I of course use Sharon Rogers with all of the same supports and team ups and leaderships that I've discussed. I also throw in Luna Snow. It's quite repetitive at this point, so you can basically just refer to the other teams for the exact same setup. You know, Misty Knight leadership with Coulson or Valkyrie or Shuri. After Luna Snow and Sharon Rogers, I usually go for Deadpool, and at this stage, he can probably clear with Thanos and Punisher, but I sometimes like to just throw in a random team-up because it's hard, and especially in the last half of the stage when he's at 11 bars and under, he has debuff immunity, so you can't use the all defense down, and then Deadpool's damage really takes a hit, and he also does need the support character to help him survive. Particularly for Thanos, I usually use the two, of course, main mind controls, the two main tier 3 DPS original characters, and then I just throw in any third. Usually Doctor Doom is a good one, but specifically for Sharon Rogers, I absolutely need to sub in Anti-Venom. And instead of Doctor Doom, I would put Deadpool here if I wasn't using him, but she needs the heals, especially against Thanos. It's pretty much a lock. Then the fourth clear I like to use against Thanos would be Ebony with, where is he? Gambit. This is another nice clear because I get the leadership of Ebony and the extra buff, and then we just go with any third. Sometimes it's Bullseye, sometimes it's Valkyrie or Shuri or another one of these support characters, and then it's the same for strikers, Deadpool, Invisible Woman, Scarlet Witch, and Sharon Rogers, and then Anti-Venom. I usually prefer Sharon Rogers over Luna Snow if I only have one choice, unless it's Ebony, in which case Luna Snow wins. And then for the last clear, I usually use Cable with She-Hulk. I usually try to I save She-Hulk's leadership for Cable because he has the most, I would say that he has the most difficulty against Thanos from these 5 characters. He does a lot of damage, but it's also, he dies pretty quickly, so he needs that damage. But actually, now if I'm thinking about it, I may want to switch She-Hulk over for Nick Fury if I can, because of the additional protection that he offers, and he also is just a better character in case Cable dies near the end. And then just whatever third character I can manage to use if I'm using, you know, Ghost Panther team up for the support. And then for the strikers, it's just the same 5 that deal the most damage as possible. He has the heal on his third skill, so he doesn't need it. So those are the characters I use. There's a ton of repetition, you know, Deadpool, Sharon Rogers, Luna Snow, Gambit, Cable, Scarlet Witch, Mr. Fantastic. And then there's a few kind of one-offs there like Captain America, Human Torch that are only specific to one day. But hopefully those lists of top DPS characters, good leaderships, and then good supports, as well as some team-up bonuses, some 5th skill co-op strategies with Gambit, and strikers have helped you guys kind of conceptualize and plan out your world boss stages, and hopefully you can push higher so you can get those booty boxes. Let me know what you guys think. Subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and of course, if you like what you see, I hope to see you again tomorrow. Take care.